Good afternoon and welcome to today's Agile webinar. We are very happy you can be with us today into our latest internal audit trends study with a particular emphasis today on what we're hearing in this dynamic climate. We have been meeting many of you in our regular events and we have 5 great presenters today to share some of their latest thinking. Just a few reminders before we get started with the content portion of the webinar. We are recording today's webinar and it will be available on demand, so look out for the email. We do recommend that you connect to a hardwired connection for the best viewing results. If you do experience any lag in the webinar, please refresh the page. As a first option, we do recommend you use Google Chrome. If you have any problems, do let us know. You can adjust the webinar audio by using the media player, and that's one of the icons at the bottom of your screen. So if anything, that is one of the areas that you can control. And if you are experiencing any other technical difficulties during the webinar, please submit your comments and questions through the Q&A area of your screen. We will be monitoring them and we will help troubleshoot to the best of our abilities. We'd like to make today's webinar as interactive as possible, so I do encourage you to submit your content questions through the webcast as well. We will address as many questions as possible during the dedicated Q&A at the end of the webinar. And naturally, we'd appreciate you letting us know any other burning issues or topics that you would like to hear more about. We are going to do polling today. Let's hope the technology gods look favorably on us. We have had a large audience register today for this webinar, so please treat this as a mini benchmarking exercise, as it will give you some insights on where you and your fellow peers stand when it comes to implementing Agile in the internal audit process. I'm now going to pass you over to the first presenter. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Gary, and hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peters. I'm really excited to be here today to share some thoughts with you. As we kick off, I hope you and your families and are safe and well, and loved ones are safe and well, and also that your businesses are adapting to this very unusual and unprecedented situation we all find ourselves in globally as we respond to the COVID situation. As I said, I think we have some great presenters here today. I'm going to moderate the discussion. We have a range of presenters from the Protiviti leadership. And for those that don't know us, we are a business risk change management consultancy with a focus on technology, business performance, and internal audit. And we've been working in the internal audit space arena with the profession itself, with a number of you on the call today, and a number of partners, not only across the UK but globally as well. I'm excited to introduce the main speakers for today. First of all, we have all 4 of our team are involved in a range of internal audit projects. They're either leading those projects, working alongside many of you on the call and many clients, and in some instances are acting as heads of audit for a range of organizations. I'm delighted to introduce Michelle Holmes. Michelle Holmes is a managing director in the UK and works with a broad range of clients within the UK and globally. And Michelle will be sharing her thoughts on what she's hearing from her clients' expectations in relation to the board, audit committees, applications for internal audit functions, and the response to the current situation, and in particular the responding in terms of the way we report and engage during this time. Next, we have Esther Delgado. Esther is a director in the UK practice at Protiviti. And along with the rest of the team today, Esther will talk in a little bit more detail about the learnings from some of our other forums, from meeting with a broad range of heads of audit, chief audit executives from across industries, and share some thoughts on the lessons learned and how we're going to reimagine, or how we need to reimagine our profession and activities as we move forward. Sam Cornish, on the next slide, is an associate director, and Sam brings a broad range of experience from being an internal audit practitioner, an auditor, external auditor, and internal auditor. But Sam's going to share his thoughts and insights, in particular around the use of data analytics in audit and the uses of a broad range of enabling technologies. Supported by Stan Opranov, and I'm really pleased Stan is here today. Stan is a technical specialist in the area of data analytics and various techniques, and Stan's going to share some insights, more detailed insights on various use cases, as well as some of the techniques that can be employed throughout the day. So just onto the agenda. Today's webinar, today's session, we really wanted to cover three core areas. In the discussions we've been having, we've had much dialogue around how have expectations changed. Today's session is really going to be a high-level overview, and we titled it Agile, but really Agile it means the extent to which we can iterate and adapt to everything we're doing, and do that in a more real-time way. And we're going to explore that a little bit more through these three broad areas. How have expectations changed in relation to the requirements of assurance functions and internal audit? What are we doing to employ techniques around real-time active assurance, and how are we reimagining the future in relation to the response to moving back to what might be considered a new norm? And we've been talking about the challenge over the assurance function internal audit, thinking about what does next generation internal audit mean, and we've been talking about this for the last few years, couple of years, as Protiviti, and engaging with the profession and across audit functions and organizations globally. And as we move on to the next slide, just looking at the framework around this, next generation internal audit. Well, next generation is really now, and the lessons we've learned over the last 10, 11 weeks as businesses have adapted, industries have adapted as well, and as well the internal audit activity has had to respond to that. We've been talking about next generation in relation to three core areas, really around governance, the way we're organized and the way we operate, our methodology and approach and the components of that needed to change over time, and then underpinning with enabling technology. And these three areas we'd like to share more on and really help share some insights as to the key components that we're seeing and hearing are more prevalent today in response to the current situation. And this isn't a point in time framework. It is an ongoing iterative journey as you look to employ some of the techniques, some of the categories that are around this framework. And we'll explore that further as we go through. And so to summarize more broadly, these three core questions, I think, and I wanted you to keep these in mind as we go through and as we think about, I guess, the challenge facing us all together. What changes to our assurance practices as professionals, as audit functions, as second and third line activity, or particularly in relation to risk and assurance? What changes to our assurance practices do we need to apply to meet new expectations? How do we adapt? How do we evolve to achieve more real-time active assurance? And what are some of the techniques and lessons learned from the changing stakeholder requirements that we're seeing? We're hearing that the COVID situation has changed the landscape for everybody, for all of us. And for audit functions, the requirement to be more flexible, to consider risk, not only in the traditional way we used to, but consideration of risk velocity and risk velocity and viability as well, and the need to adapt to the current situation. And as we think about that, how we needed to adapt in order to provide real insights in a really different way. And the hot topic that major topic that's coming up through all the forums we're leading at the moment and have been over the last few weeks is this transitional period. The word new normal was used many times, but what does it really mean? What are the pillars of activity we need to be thinking about as we take the best of what we're doing now as an assurance professional and transition that into a new way of working once people and organizations move back to their offices and locations, or operate in a more hybrid model as we move forward. So please keep those in mind. And why don't I pass it over to our first speaker, who's Michelle Holmes, who's going to share some thoughts, as I said, on how have expectations changed and what are we hearing from boards, heads of audit, and other professionals that we're interacting with. So why don't you kick off, Michelle?
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. As Mark said, we've been conducting these forums for a few weeks with various stakeholder groups, whether that's heads of audit or audit functions. I've also been, as many of you would be, talking quite regularly to my audit committee chairs. And so in my capacity as a head of audit for a client, I've seen some of the changes around their expectations on frequency with which we communicate and what they want to communicate to me about. And what I've found interesting is a common theme around wanting to communicate more regularly. And as one audit committee chair very bluntly said, I know you have an opinion and I want to hear it more often and more loudly. And we had a good, robust debate around, the level of activity or assurance work that I need to do to present him with, my opinion or my position. And there was a greater sense of flexibility of how we audit, and we'll talk through some of those examples later on in the presentation, but really trying to move to something that's much quicker in cadence, reporting to the stakeholder groups much more frequently. In some cases, it's weekly now. Speaking to the audit committee chair on a weekly basis, that's starting to go back to kind of more normal frequency of monthly. But in the beginning period of COVID-19, as they were really focused as a board on the change in the risk landscape, I was having weekly interactions with the audit committee chair and with the various stakeholder groups. So I think, the frequency of communications has definitely changed, their expectations, and what a lot of you have validated in our forums that your stakeholders are asking for is more assurance more quickly, even if it's not a perfect 90-day audit. So some use the term health checks, others use, readiness reviews, but something that's more akin to short, sharp reviews, and maybe less audit objectives, really focused on the key risks that we're all facing, or that our clients are facing now, our companies are facing now. And so what we really want to do today is, given that backdrop, talk to you about what we're seeing around the adoption of Agile in the audit practices, what we're seeing in terms of reporting practices, and I've shared a few examples from my own experience that have resonated, and I've received a few questions, so I thought I'd share the example again and welcome some feedback. And then the dynamic and data-driven audit approach. And as Mark had mentioned before, the vision of next-gen internal audit is now, and to the extent that you maybe were anticipating moving to more data-driven approaches or starting to dip your toes into the water, we really are seeing a change in expectations that we're fully adopting that now. And if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. Just get going and iterate and grow and mature in your abilities, your capabilities, and your approach as you go. So why don't we go to the next slide and cover the first element about applying an agile mindset. And as I said, for me, there's been a real key focus on early identifications of risk, and that really does require continuous engagement with the stakeholders. And I found a much closer collaborative working relationship with my second line functions in the clients that I serve, and then clients that I speak to, they seem the same, where we really are starting to share and align our assurance capabilities around the early identification of risk. As I've mentioned, more audits delivered frequently, and so chunking up the audit plan into something that's shorter cadence, possibly even some clients have used the term scrap the audit plan and gone back to the drawing board. And I think we all know the key risk areas that our stakeholders want assurance over, and it's just really finding a way to deliver that assurance in a more meaningful way. And so keeping the audit plan flexible has definitely been a key component of what I've seen out in practice in the last 3 to 4 months. Esther, did you want to comment on the challenges of working?
Yes, thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Another key aspect we wanted to highlight in relation to applying agile mindset is challenging the traditional ways of working in terms of the team dynamics. For example, having higher engagement from the team and with the stakeholders during the execution. Also challenging timelines, perhaps shortening the audit cycle to accelerate the delivery, challenging the audit approach to execution, so applying a much more forward-looking approach focused on emerging risks, as Michelle was saying in the first point. Another aspect, also very key, is providing influential reports, which are possible thanks to a more data-driven approach, providing real-time data, real-time insight to our key stakeholders. And then finally, the process testing result aspect over the thoroughness of documentation, especially important, I believe, in relation to the communication. How important the communication with stakeholders is throughout the execution, and maybe prioritizing that over the thoroughness of the documentation. So next slide, over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Esther. So as I said at a previous forum, I discussed an example around the way my team and I have adopted real-time reporting for a client. And the ask from the audit committee chair was, I want to see something from you every single week. And if you take your normal reporting framework, and the number of controls and governance processes over issuing an audit report, that sounded pretty impossible, near impossible to me. And so we debated how we might do this and do something meaningful. And what we designed was, a one-page summary, like a health check report around all of the pillars around operational resilience, which was the specific audit we were conducting. And we did provide an update of that on every single week. And with the express agreement with the stakeholder group and the audit committee chair that this was an ongoing dialogue. And to my surprise, and pleasantly surprised, it actually changed the way the stakeholder group were interacting with us. So it definitely felt it became more collaborative. So every single week they got to see what they saw as a influx view, of my opinion of their control environment around the specific pillar, and were able to provide challenge or additional information, and even more surprisingly, make changes almost real time. So what we found over the course of 6 weeks doing this review, that a number of the observations or questions we'd raised in week 1, 2, or 3 were already remediated by the end of week 6. And so you could really see that the ability to report to them on a higher frequency and just a quick, snapshot of what the key risks or concerns are around a specific area really helped them to focus their activity around remediating and managing risk in that scenario. So that's worked really well for us, and actually something that the audit committee chair has now said, please don't go back to doing, issue a scope memo and give me an audit report in 90 to 120 days. Give me something in between those two. So, we're working on templates for maybe monthly reporting, which is similar to continuous monitoring, but more formalized audit reporting around assurance activity. So I think that's definitely shown that we can demonstrate value, we can have an impact on helping our clients manage risk, we can connect and consider the different needs of our stakeholder groups, and that's really, as I said, help them to respond to risk in a real-time fashion. And I think, as Esther mentioned, real focus on substance over form, and so they were really more keen to know what was my position on something in a much quicker manner, even if it wasn't perfectly worded, or we hadn't done all the work that I would necessarily say I wanted to do to support an audit opinion. And then, as you'll hear through the course of this webinar, the use of data and technology, it's been critical. So visualizations and using the KPIs and KRIs and the metrics that the business uses to manage themselves and reporting a control view on that has landed really well with my stakeholder group. Esther, would you like to take? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, dynamic and data-driven approach is also a very common theme we've heard from audit functions we work with and we speak with. And we believe with automated frequent analysis of data, we are able to perform control and risk assessments in real time or near real time. And also continuous auditing is very, very important, as Michelle was mentioning. Is a method we use to perform control assessments on a more frequent basis to provide that real-time insight that audit committees and boards are requesting, and most of the time using technology and data, which is the key. So to achieve that ongoing and real-time aspect in our approach, technology is the key. So we will discuss in detail enabling technologies in the second half of this webinar. And we realize this is a journey and there are challenges associated to embedding this data-driven approach into the internal audit practices. But we believe it's crucial to actually remain relevant as a function and to be perceived as a strategic partner within the business. So hopefully we will provide those practical steps we believe we can take as a function to embark in that journey. Mark, over to you now.
Thanks, Esther, and thank you, Michelle. So some really interesting high-level commentary there around the expectation, the changing expectation. Audit committee and key stakeholders, and some of the techniques being employed. And as both Michelle and Esther said, we'll go through and explore those a little bit further. I think we're going to go to a poll question now. And Gary, did you just want to highlight the poll question and see if we can get our guests to respond, and then we'll comment on it afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm just about to reveal the poll question page where you can make selections. The key question today is, which of the following audit activities have occurred within your internal audit function as a direct result of the effects of COVID-19? You can select as many as you want, and then I'll give you around 40 seconds to have a look at the options and submit your questions.
Yeah, and as that polling question, as our guests are responding to that polling question, we've seen a range of changes depending on the impact of COVID from one industry where, if you think about hospitality and the airline industry devastated by the current COVID situation, the response to the assurance activity has in some areas been curtailed, or it's been refocused, and we've had experience of clients redeploying teams to other activities within second line risk or even first line to help the business protect themselves from the current situation, as well as think about processes that have changed and assess real-time risk, as Michelle and Esther described, ranging from that through to where some industries who are in high demand at the moment as customers and clients require new services, new support, increased support during this time, and the audit activity is continued in the same manner as before in terms of volume, or even increased, but the nature of work being executed is in line with the approaches that Michelle talked to there. So really interested to see where there's been a full refresh of plans, where there's been direct support for operational activities, where data analytics has been increased, or where there's a combination of those responses. And Gary, do you want to?
The results are in now, Mark, so I'll move on to the next slide. Thank
you very much. And that's really interesting to see some interesting results there, with 45% of a full refresh of plans, a greater percentage of direct support for operational activities, and as we see, data analytics being utilised in some areas, but at a lower stage. Michelle, did you just want to share some thoughts on what we're seeing here and just reflect on the results of the first poll?
Yeah, I think in line with running this question at a global session a few weeks ago, I think this is fairly consistent. As you mentioned, Mark, some industries, given the impact of COVID, their assurance activities have completely changed. And so there's been a full refresh of existing audit plans. But and also the correlation between the redeployments for operational activities. I would be interested, and maybe it will come through in the Q&A, in terms of the increased use of data. Definitely a need to do that to apply Agile and to meet stakeholder expectations. So I definitely would want to explore that further.
Great, thank you, Michelle.
So what we want to do for the remainder of the webinar now is really talk through 3 key areas where we see clients focusing their efforts to apply Agile, and the team will talk through some real-life case studies and applications within the end-to-end audit lifecycle. And again, just with the key view of staying relevant by quickly adapting our audit approach, evolving and aligning our assurance frameworks to key risks and changing risks, and helping the stakeholders to remain focused on key risks. And then, as we have probably belabored already, but will continue to do so, is the use of data and technology to support the audit. So I'm going to hand over to the team now to present 3 key areas where we see teams focusing.
Thank you, Michelle. Dynamic risk assessment and continuous monitoring. I would say the businesses we work with and we speak with are looking to enhance their risk assessment programs to generate relevant information regarding risk factors and risks within the business that can support risk-informed decisions. So more and more we're seeing this dynamic risk exercise embedded within the audit practice. I would say the key features of a dynamic risk assessment are these 3: agile, integrated, and aligned. It needs to be agile mainly because of the impact that it has on driving internal audit priorities. And it has to be integrated, so the integration with other next-generation audit practices, for example, process mining and advanced analytics, as we've mentioned already. And aligned with a consistent view of risks across the 3 lines of defense, and providing and enabling that meaningful collaboration with other assurance functions within the business. So in this slide, we have outlined a very, very summarized version of our approach when we help our clients and when we lead the implementation of a dynamic risk assessment. The first step is defining key risk indicators. So identifying that dynamic set of indicators that are going to be the drivers of the exercise, and also defining the process to capture the data, which is sometimes one of the challenging phases of this activity. The second step would be deciding the thresholds, and this is related to risk appetite and the acceptable level of risk that businesses are willing to define. So tolerance levels. And for that, we can use historical information as well. The third step would be data. So gathering the data and defining the data governance processes as well to ensure the quality of the same. And then finally, the last step would be, as I said, this is a very summarized version of it. The final step would be reporting and monitoring. So defining the frequency, building the right reporting tool, taking into consideration the different stakeholders as well internally, so tailoring the message depending on the stakeholder, and also leveraging advanced analytics, as I mentioned, within the aligned aspect of it. So that's overall our approach to defining and implementing a dynamic risk assessment that would generate that kind of relevant information about risk factors within the business that will definitely be helping the strategic setting process and the decision-making process for the business. Sam, over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Esther. As Mark mentioned at the top of the presentation, we see next-gen audit in three distinct categories, and one of the legs of that is enabling technology. I think the key thing for me and what we're seeing in a lot of the work that we're doing is that the technology is an enabler. It doesn't bring with it the solution on its own. You know, garbage in does equal garbage out, and so it's important that we all understand what it is we are trying to do with the technology at our disposal, and really focus on trying to turn data into information. We highlight four key areas here on machine learning and artificial intelligence, process mining, RPA, and advanced analytics. And I think what's also important to highlight is that these four types of technology can all be applied in different degrees of intensity and depth, but can also be applied throughout the audit life cycle. I think a lot of people, when they think about data analysis, might be thinking about audit testing that can be done on big sets of data, and that definitely does have its place. But we want to also stress that data analysis can be inward-facing as well as outward-facing. So actually, the use of smart dashboards that can give greater insights to the extent of coverage within the audit plan is another key component of data analysis that is a really smart way that we can harness what we have at our fingertips. And Michelle touched on this earlier as well. Waiting for the right answer to come along is not what we see as the best way forward, because in fact it's only once you start really working with data and trying to gather meaningful insights from it that you realistically realize what the problems with your data are, and we find that everybody has problems with their data, but by analyzing and interrogating, you can get to the bottom of those problems quicker, and solve problems sooner as well. We see a great opportunity here and I think, to Mark's point, it's really been accelerated by the COVID-19 lockdown that we're all experiencing. But there's a fantastic opportunity here with regards to people and talent around making sure that our auditors have a risk and control mindset, that we're looking at the problem end to end in using data analysis to inform our decisions, and really focusing on key risks, as Michelle touched on. We've conducted a really relevant piece of work recently, looking at process mining around an AP process, and what came out of the initial scoping of that piece of work was a change in the risk focus on what was done previously. So there was a real iterative approach to what it is that we needed to focus on in order to address the key risks that was informed by and enabled by the use of process mining technology. The second key point I wanted to touch on was that yes, there are specialist tools that can help in a range of different areas, but we also shouldn't be afraid of tools that we already have at our fingertips. And I'm talking specifically as a user of the Office 365 suite of tools. But at its heart, at our hearts, I think all auditors are data analysts. We all like to base our decision making in cold hard facts. And we've all been using spreadsheets for a long time, but actually tightening up the use of those spreadsheets, controlling how those are governed and input into, so that we've all got good spreadsheet discipline. It can be a massive enabler in analysing our data, analysing our audit plans, using risk data that the business has provided us as well. Building on top of that, some Power BI dashboarding. These are all steps we can take in trying to take a better audit-enabled approach. I won't dwell too much on the writing on this slide, but needless to say, I think what this does is show quite neatly how the use of analytics and the transformation of data into information applies in a number of different realms. It's not just about testing large data sets. The visualization of that data or the visualization of that analysis is as important, so that we can portray to our stakeholders everything that they need to know, not everything that we know. And that's a trap that we see we've seen a couple of times, auditors and audit departments falling into. I wanted to hand over there just to Stan. Stan and I work quite closely in helping clients with enabling technology use, but just for Stan to do a bit more of a deep dive into those technologies that frame up the audit process in its entirety. Over to you, Stan.
Thank you, Sam, and hello everyone from me. On this slide, you're probably familiar with the standard audit life cycle, but what we've tried to do here is show you that the number of different technologies that can be applied to each phase of our audit life cycle. Here we've mapped out the 4 key components of our enabling technologies from our next-gen wheel. And you can see that in each phase, from project planning to execution and reporting, we can use a number of technologies, usually in combination with one another, And all that will take us on that continuous monitoring and continuous auditing journey. To give you some specific examples, we recently used the advanced analytics to create a data set that was feeding into the CAES for a dynamic risk assessment, which our client used and started using for their annual risk assessment planning. And in fact, they started reviewing that a lot more regularly than annually. Similarly, using visualization and automated data feeds, you can use robots and RPA to automatically flag, store evidence into your audit files and systems for KPIs that have gone into a red threshold area, for example, when performing the project risk assessments. Using some more sophisticated technology such as machine learning, you can analyze large data sets in order to risk focus your audits. For example, downloading your whole GL ledger or the GL ledger for a particular process, and risk analyzing using machine learning that is continuously improving and flagging unusual transactions which should be followed up and reviewed by audit. Process mining is one technology that really can be transformative and applied to the entirety of the audit life cycle. And I would like to show you in a bit more detail how we've used that on an engagement that we recently completed. Like Sam mentioned, we were looking at the AP cycle, but in a completely different client, we looked at the customer journey for mortgage applications. So this truly can be applied to any process or any number of industries. On the slide, you can see that using process mining, we risk assessed and understood all the processes associated with the area of focus. And then based on the RCM, the traditional RCM we're familiar with, we ran tests using the machine learning bench on the entire population, which effectively completed the design effectiveness and the operating effectiveness component of our audit automatically and on the entire set of data for the period in scope. Another benefit of the tool is that any observations, potential exceptions, can be validated with the business stakeholders within the tool. And once these are validated, you can really report impactfully and interactively in order to pass your message on in a better way to the wider business. We are currently also working on integrating all this automated testing with the company's GSC system so that there is true live monitoring of this whole process and all associated controls, which is what we're all striving for in the form of continuous monitoring. And on the next slide, I want to show you some of the outputs that we have produced, and hopefully you can see how much you can visualize in one simple dashboard that is interactive. And if we can report to audit committees and the wider business in this way, we can really be an accelerator of innovation and change in the way we do things. As internal auditors, there's currently an expectation that we drive innovation and we undertake data-driven approaches. And on the right-hand side, you can see the entirety of the process mapped out. On the bottom slide, you can see that by covering all the transactions in our population, in addition to all the standard controls that were in scope for the audit, we also performed a segregation of duties test on top of what was in our terms of reference, because once we have all the data in one place, we truly can get can perform a deep dive audit of any process. So hopefully this gives you a flavor and inspires you, like it does me, on how the tools and technologies are available now. And I also would like to say that not only the businesses and the clients we work for expect us to embrace data, but also our staff members, our auditors, are all more and more digitally mature, and they expect us to perform our work efficiently, more cleverly. And I truly believe that a data-driven approach and a technology-driven approach is the way forward. I will now pass it over to Mark, who I believe has another question for you.
I'll pick up for Mark while I think he's coming off mute. The next poll question is, of the following, which have been the top challenges for your internal audit team in responding to the effects of COVID-19? I'll move over onto the poll screen where you can actually choose your options.
Yeah,
I'll give you...
Thank you, Gary. And yeah, some interesting insights from Sam and Stan and the team there, particularly around the use of real-time active assurance and the risk assessment approach, but also how enabling technology can underpin that. And we recognise that organisations are in different stages of the adoption of data-driven approaches and the use of technology, but we also highlight that our stakeholder groups are saying that they want more and they want different insights, and this is just one of the ways by which we can do this. But it's not an easy and quick fix. It takes time to develop a strategy and approach, but there are some quick wins though, and there are some approaches, as the team described, that you could adopt relatively quickly to get that. This next question really is, what's been the top challenge? There have been many challenges for you and for everyone on the call. But what have been the top challenges, and how will some of these challenges continue as we move through the next stage? Identifying and aligning SMEs required, the true skill sets, capabilities required to address emerging risks, understanding expectations, staying updated on changing priorities and adapting your approach. And obviously, as we're all working, many of us, all of us are working remotely, will that continue? How will it change? And how do we ensure that our people remain motivated to continue working in the way that they are? So let's look at the results. And quite interesting there. I think you can select multiple options on this. And I'm just going to ask Esther, do you just want to comment on the results here? Some high results on stakeholder expectations, down to the motivation of staff there. Do you just want to add some commentary from what we're seeing here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. Well, it's very interesting to see that understanding stakeholder expectations and prioritizing the work effort is kind of the key one there. From my perspective, I would say understanding those expectations is strictly related to the Agile mindset that we've described, right? So it's understanding them, it's tailoring the message, it's tailoring the reporting to those stakeholders and different type of stakeholders as well. And also the engagement with the board and the audit committee has been crucial in the last few weeks. So definitely aligned to what we are hearing and we are seeing in internal audit functions. It's also interesting to see the low rate for motivating staff. And again, I think it's aligned to what we are seeing. I think we've never seen more new initiatives. We've never seen more new projects, ideas coming on the table, and everyone is very, very engaged and very motivated in these very difficult and challenging times. So audit functions, I think, recognize the need of remaining relevant and the need of reinventing themselves to be aligned to the priorities of the business.
Thank you, Esther.
Reimagining the future, yes. So, Gareth, you can move on. Yeah, perfect. This is what we are hearing, and this is what we are seeing the businesses we work with, again, thinking about. And we've tried to outline here the key pillars of the future operating models. So we've learned that internal audit functions need to reflect on lessons learned and future implications for risk management, future implications on resilience programs, and also the future operating model for internal audit in a specific. So one of the key pillars in that potential future operating model we recognize is risk assessment and audit delivery. And a key aspect, the key success factor, let's say, from our perspective, is agility and is applying that agile mindset, but also is integrating with other functions and also helping and moving the risk management capabilities of the business forward, given the knowledge we have on risk management and controls. In relation to the skills and capabilities pillar, again, one of the key success factors I would mention is the ability to provide a rapid deployment of cross-functional teams, again, in relation to the SME capabilities and expertise required for new emerging risks. Also, new models of stakeholder engagement and the stakeholder management, as we've seen in the response for one of our questions. And in general, the new technology and technical skills required is something the internal audit functions are definitely scanning and thinking through to achieve the right operating model there. Obviously, multifaceted and multidisciplinary teams are required more than ever. So that's something we are seeing also happening now. And thirdly, the digital mindset and technology application. So in the near future, we as internal auditors need to continue introducing the use of data and continue promoting that digital mindset in our teams, I believe, and obviously leveraging new tools and technologies as we progress. And Michelle, I don't know if you want to add anything to what we are seeing as the key pillars, considerations, components of that new, whatever the new normal is.
Thanks, Esther. And I think you did a great job of summarizing what we're seeing out in the marketplace. And I guess just to reflect on the results of the poll question around motivating the team, I think that speaks to the readiness of our teams, of our functions to embrace the future, to embrace the new normal. And we should capitalize on that and embrace that enthusiasm and that ambition to do things differently and innovate.
Great, thank you. So, Mark, over to you now.
Yeah, no, thank you both. We're getting had a lot of questions through the system here. A lot of questions that are through. I think we're going to have to capture these and respond and share those out. But I think as we come to summarize, we'll probably take a couple of them just to respond. And I don't know, Michelle and Esther, you've highlighted some of the key pillars, but if you talk to, one or two of the key opportunities that that we, as assurance providers, internal auditors, have as we evolve out of the current situation. Michelle, perhaps you could highlight, what some of the biggest opportunities are, both for the positioning of our work and for the skills and innovation and capability that we might need going forward.
Thanks, Mark. I think in terms of positioning the audit function, I think there's probably never been a better time to demonstrate that we can be a key business partner, and having interacted with, as I said, an improving relationship with second line functions at my clients, that's really encouraging. And I think we should really, as our view of where assurance functions will go and aligning our assurance activities across the three lines of defense, I think we should really harness the opportunities we have now of working so collaboratively in this environment and not lose that going forward. And then I think the skill sets that we're adopting now at pace, they will become the new norm. I don't think we will revert back to traditional ways of working in most cases. I think, having demonstrated now that we can adapt and we can work differently, will become the new normal expectation and not a changed expectation in this environment.
Thank you. And I'm just going to take another question that's come in as well. Esther and Sam, perhaps you could both share a perspective on this. The second poll that we had there, motivating staff was the lowest challenge for audit teams responding to the effects of COVID-19. Isn't this a little bit alarming, and could this be interpreted as the effects of COVID on audit staff working from home, trying to execute work remotely, similar to all individuals that are having to work from home? But is it alarming that was considered the lowest challenge, or are we seeing different things as we engage with clients and stakeholders? Sam, if you wanted to just share a view on that, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Can do, Mark. I think full disclosure, we myself included, have all felt the shift in pressure that comes in working in a remote environment without the interaction with colleagues and friends as well, and that shift that's required mentally in adjusting to what is being asked of us, the added time drains that do come in with working from home. I myself have 2 young children. We've got to look after them. So we save time on the commute, and we lose time elsewhere. What I'm seeing from clients and from colleagues, though, is very much a sense of togetherness in dealing with this. Much more a sense of community from the teams that I interact with, and so yes, I think that there was a risk of staff motivation being dragged down, the effects of COVID-19 on staff, but actually the opposite effect with the enhancement of community has, if nothing else, balanced that out and potentially helped as well. We are all lucky, I think, as auditors to be in brains jobs that can be done from home, and I think that on the whole, what we're seeing is people actually embracing this as an opportunity to change and improve, and to perhaps try something different that maybe they were scared of doing before.
Thank you, Sam. That was great. I just want to take one last question before we wrap up, because I think it's an important one. And Michelle, perhaps you could just talk to this, just a brief response. There's a question arising from our discussion on reporting and the frequency of reporting, and getting the balance right between being seen too much of a watchdog rather than helping with a solution-orientated approach to help stakeholders. Can you just talk about the balance between frequency and insight that needs to be shared to ensure that the time to value is seen as being helpful rather than overseeing, rather?
Thanks, Mark. Just thinking of the best way to answer the question. I think the key thing when you talk about more frequent communication or more frequent feedback, it's in what we communicate. And so going back to my previous example, I think what the business found helpful about weekly reporting and operational resilience is that they were needing to respond in the current environment, and therefore were able to take the weekly feedback and build that back into their plans, build that back into how they were adjusting their BCP and how they were building their resiliency into their operations. But there is always a come back and do a fulsome review and a requirement to do that. I just think it's balancing that within the current environment and what they needed then, and to what your stakeholder needs at the point in time versus maybe coming back and doing a steady state review, more kind of end to end at a later point in time. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And we've got a lot of questions. That have remained unanswered. Don't worry, we're going to come back to you with the responses there and share that on future sessions and on other blogs that we share with the community. We'll do a write-up of this webinar as well. What we wanted to do was throughout this webinar was just to share some insights. There's a lot more detail that we could go into and will go into in other sessions, particularly in relation to transition activity. Much of the thoughts and challenges and opportunities that all of us as professionals across the assurance field are thinking about is how do we take the best of what we've been able to do now in terms of our innovation, use of more tools, different skill sets identified, different ways of engaging, and make that be the way we the core of the way we operate in the future. I want to thank you for your time. Hopefully you found that session very helpful. There is a number of materials that underpin some of the commentary, which is available on our website and can be available in the other forums that we have. I'd encourage you to explore that, read it, and also if you need any further support or would like to progress the dialogue that we shared today, please don't hesitate to contact us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and all stay safe and well. And thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on today's webinar.